Hello lovelies, today we're going to take a look at The Village of Greenhaven by Mr. Ryan David of Nerdcognito. This is a system agnostic setting book, the idea being that you can just pop this into whatever, in this case fantasy game, that you happen to be playing, and it should fit with most games with minimal tweaking. So there aren't really statistics or anything in here. It's a short, small book of a kind of introductory village, which you often find in a lot of fantasy role-playing games, is that the initial adventures are set around a village, right? It's very cheap, and it's only, 40 pages of content. So, you're not risking that much by purchasing it, should you do so. The idea of system agnostic material is not a new one. It has faced challenges in the past in terms of acceptability, in much the same way that generic systems often have issues. GURPS, for example, while popular in its time, has never really hugely taken off. Interlock in its time, similar issues. I think the idea of a one-size-fits-all system is what holds those back, but in this instance, there is no system. This is all just content. Of course, I have to do the usual thing and inform you that the art in this is AI produced. If that's a deal breaker for you, that's a deal breaker for you. If it's not, it's not. I think it's okay for the most part, even good in lots of places. I believe Ryan uses his own AI model, so it doesn't necessarily have the same issues as something like Midjourney or Bing Image Creator or whatever else you care to mention. And it does have a more consistent look than a lot of those places might provide. It does mean that it's somewhat lavishly illustrated in a way that it probably couldn't be or wouldn't be if it was made using conventional means and hiring artists and so on. It is what it is. So you get a breakdown of the village, the important places within the village, the vague vital statistics of the village, key characters, all of that sort of thing. And as a starting village, then it has enough places of interest, enough people of interest. You could do some village-based adventuring, and then there are plenty of jumping off points to where you could start adventuring proper. So there are places nearby, like the Whispering Falls, which have a certain mystical frisson to them. Moonlight Meadow, similarly. And there are features in the village itself, and people within the village itself that could give you adventure hooks, and so on. So for a low-level sort of new campaign, jumping off point, starting point, I think it accomplishes its purpose. I do have some nitpicks. Right. So, Greenhaven has a population of 100. That is sub-village status. That is below the threshold for the census here in the United Kingdom. If an area has less than 100 people living in it, then the UK census doesn't bother with it, because below that sort of threshold of people lose anonymity, because you can figure out who lives within that area. All right, 100 is Hamlet territory. It's Thorpe territory. Even back in the past, that would be small, very small. For example, I live in a fairly big village. There is a smaller village about 2 miles away, mile and a half away, called Stoke. that was called Stochs back in the time of the Doomsday Book. That's when the Normans invaded and took over, and they inventoried England for stuff to nick and lay claim to. And back then, in 1066 or thereabouts, 1086 was when the survey was done, this little village, much smaller than mine, had a population of 24 households, which is about 100 people, right? But it had no facilities, it had no shops, no stores, it held no market, nothing. It had 2 villager households, 10 smallholding farmsteads, 12 hovels for slaves, right? And that was over 100 people in that area. So Greenhaven feels small, particularly in a world with magic, and as written, it isn't plausible that such a small village would have, a little magical trinket shop and its own blacksmith and all the rest of it, unless you rewrite Greenhaven to be like the local market village where surrounding villages come to, or put it on a major travel route, something like that, right? Then it all makes a bit more sense. But then you would also think the population would be a little higher. So little nitpicks. Another little nitpick: I would avoid using underlining in a published work, right? It's fine in documents and essays and things like that. In published works, it looks a bit amateurish, messy, scrappy. So I would use more varied sizes of title text, or just have it in bold if it's a subheading, or even italics and a subheading, rather than using underlining, which just tends to not look that good. But yeah, you've got a variety of places here. You can get your adventuring supplies, you can get magical trinkets, but nothing too powerful. You can get your swords hammered back into shape. There is an elf who does embroidery and is also super hot. There is both an inn and a boarding house, so you've got your options there. Apothecary if you need your medicine, that sort of thing. So there's a good variety of places and a few local points of interest which are good for adventures, and a lakeside chapel which may or may not also house a brothel. So there's a couple of ways you could take that. Either there's nature worship going on, which often has a fertility aspect to it, or in genuine medieval times, even up until relatively recent times, up until Tudor times, certainly, nunneries were quite often also brothels for the church. Hence the Shakespearean insult "hie thee to a nunnery," which was basically fuck off to a brothel. Don't leave me alone. So yeah, not as out of place as some people might think, but again, the sheer smallness of the village makes it hard to justify, unless you tweak things a bit, which of course you can. We have local druid activity, all sorts. We also have some nice random tables for different names of people who might be in the village or visiting the village, motivations, moods, random goods and equipment that people might have, random events if you want them to just spice up your visit, random events for the nearby forest, types of monsters that might show up. Yeah, random tables appeal to some people. I tend to prefer to use more structured encounters, but sometimes you need inspiration, and a random table is plenty good for that. The colours are a bit more vibrant than they appear on camera, but it is I think it's a lightning source print. I can't see the telltale, but since it came from drive-through, I think it's a Lightning Source print. And the print quality, therefore, isn't as good as I would like. I prefer Lulu's quality, but for Lightning Source, this is a pretty good printing. It doesn't feel as waxy. The colours are more vibrant than they typically are with a drive-through / Lightning Source print. So the quality is the print quality is better than normal for those sources, and it's relatively speaking cheap. It's not making a lot of money on it. It's a sort of introductory product. I think this will work better once it's part of a pantheon of products. I think the presentation needs a small amount of work, but not much. The generic nature of it does count against it a little bit, but it doesn't have to. Don't know if I'm making sense there. But yeah, it's all right, innit? Yeah, bruv. Scores then. Style-wise, I mean, it is lavishly illustrated. The typical guideline for art in the tabletop gaming space is one piece of art for every 3 pages or so. This has art on every page, I think, and that just wouldn't be possible on an RPG industry budget outside of the big boys without the AI art. And I don't particularly want to get into a debate about AI art again, but I know it does matter to quite a lot of you, so yeah, worth bringing up again. The content is engagingly written. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It doesn't get florid. It's clear that Ryan wasn't being paid by the word for his own work, so the language is nice and tight and descriptive. So style-wise, I mean, just as an object, high 3, bordering on a 4. Let's be generous. This is first outing in the world of professional games publishing. So let's give it a 4 for style. In terms of substance, I mean, the relative shortness of the descriptions and so on is actually a virtue in this case, because it communicates itself well. It's a breezy, informal read, which is how I like to make my own work. Could perhaps do with a few more, even more hooks and locations and places and things and threats, and it could do with a little bit more placement within a world. So the middling 3 for substance, but it is a short, cheap product. So that brings it up a little bit. So I'd say 3.5, even though that makes the maths more annoying for me in terms of substance. So 4 for style, 3.5 for substance, 7.5 out of 10. It's above average, especially for a new entry. It's probably worth picking up if you're planning to do any sort of somewhat cozy, or not necessarily, because you might want to contrast, fantasy game. If you're starting out a new D&D campaign or Dragonbane or anything like that, Greenhaven's a good fit as a jumping off point for a new campaign, especially if you're going to sandbox it. So there you go. Zang.
In the worlds before Monkey, primal chaos reigned. Heaven sought order, but the phoenix can fly only when its feathers are grown. The 4 worlds formed again and yet again, as endless eons wheeled and passed. Time and the pure essences of heaven, the moisture of the earth, the powers of the sun and moon, all worked upon a certain rock, old as creation, and it became magically fertile. That first egg was named Thought. The God Buddha, the Father Buddha said, "With our thoughts we make the world." Elemental forces caused the egg to hatch. From it then came a stone monkey, and the nature of monkey was irrepressible.
Irrepressible is a simple RPG of fortune cookie wisdom and martial arts.
taken from Journey to the West. You can buy it at lulu.com, post-mort.com, and drive-through-RPG.
The gallows is cold and the gibbet is lonely. We'll make things hot for you here. The gallows is cold and the gibbet is lonely. We'll make things